They laughed while my grandfather's bridge fell into the creek. But they didn't know that I owned the only other road into their neighborhood. And when you corner an engineer with a grudge, he builds his revenge one permit at a time. My name's Garrett Sullivan. I'm 54 years old, third-generation civil engineer, and the last Sullivan's still living on the same 127 acres my grandfather bought back in 1938. Around here, mornings don't start with traffic. They start with the hiss of creek water sliding over limestone, the smell of diesel from an old pickup, and the kind of silence you only get in rural Pennsylvania. And until last year, they started with the sound of my tires crunching across the bridge my grandfather built with his own hands in 1943. Pop Sullivan's bridge wasn't just stone and timber. He pulled the foundation rocks from Blackwater Creek himself, milled the timbers, and forged the iron brackets at the town blacksmith. It took him 8 months of sweat, blood, and patience during wartime scarcity. That bridge carried 3 generations of our family across the water. My dad taught me to fish under it. I replaced its planks when I was 16. It wasn't just infrastructure, it was legacy. Then, one April morning, Legacy met a bulldozer. At 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the growl of diesel. Pulled on boots, didn't even grab a shirt. Out by the creek, a yellow bulldozer was ripping through my bridge, stones cracking, timbers exploding into the water, dust and smoke rising like fog. The operator didn't stop when I screamed. He just waved me off and yelled, "County order, ma'am said it's condemned." And there they were, 3 SUVs parked up the access road. Darlene Price, the new HOA president of Birchwood Estates, standing beside 2 board members filming on their phones. Laughing, I called 911, but by the time the deputy arrived 40 minutes later, my bridge was rubble. The air stank of crushed limestone. The sheriff shrugged. "Civil matter," he said. "You'll have to sue." Darlene handed him a folder and said with a smile, "We removed a hazard. We actually saved the county a lawsuit." That was the moment I stopped shaking, because in her eyes, I wasn't a neighbor. I was an obstacle, and that's when I decided she might bulldoze faster, but I build better. I called my lawyer, Mitch Kowalski, an old friend from high school who handles land disputes. He took one look at the photos and said, "Garrett, this is textbook property destruction. We filed for an injunction and $78,000 in damages, every penny backed by receipts, repair logs, and tax records showing that bridge had always been private property." Darlene's lawyers countersued, claimed my bridge had become public infrastructure through 80 years of public use, what lawyers call adverse possession. Mitch just laughed. "They clearly didn't do their homework," he said. "Adverse possession doesn't work when the owner maintains the property." And I had receipts going back to 1975, every plank replaced, every bag of gravel bought, every gallon of sealant logged. The judge dismissed their claim in 3 weeks. Small victory, but the first crack in her wall. Then came her next move. 2 days later, a friend sent me screenshots from Birchwood's private Facebook group. "Local landowner blocking community safety improvements," Darlene wrote, "refuses to cooperate with flood mitigation efforts. Some people care more about old junk than their neighbor's safety." Another post mocked me for running outside, in my underwear screaming about a bridge. Someone hinted I wasn't stable after my wife's death. I never used social media, but watching strangers call me unstable, selfish, and dangerous hurt more than I'll admit. That night, my buddy Lau called. "You gonna respond?" I said, "No, I'm not fighting on Facebook. I'm planning to win in real life." I pulled out my old Rolodex, actual paper cards, and started calling people. Engineers, surveyors, county clerks, folks who still remembered the days when handshake deals meant something. 3 days later, Rosalie from the county planning office whispered through the phone, "Garrett, I shouldn't tell you this, but Darlene's been pushing her boyfriend, Commissioner Tom Gresham, to fast-track permits for Birchwood's new community center and tennis courts." How fast? I asked. 90-day reviews done in 3 weeks. And Garrett, she, and the commissioner co-own a condo in Florida. Public record. That was the moment the engineer in me turned detective. I camped at the county clerk's office for 3 days straight, pulled zoning maps that smelled like dust and government neglect. Then I found it. Birchwood's private sewage treatment plant had a conditional permit from the state environmental agency valid for 18 months. That deadline had expired 14 months ago, and the extensions, both approved by Commissioner Gresham himself. If that system failed inspection, the HOA would have to truck out sewage for $400 per house per month until repairs were done. 85 houses, half a year. I called my old intern, now an environmental engineer in Philadelphia. She confirmed everything. Garrett, she said, if you file a complaint, it triggers a mandatory inspection within 60 days. I didn't have to think long, because that same afternoon, I got 3 code enforcement citations: unlicensed junk vehicle, unsecured burn pile, and illegal signage. Each came with $150 per day fines. I called the inspector, a nervous kid named Tyler. He said quietly, "Sir, I was told to drive by your property daily. I'm just doing my job." He didn't say who told him, but he didn't have to. That night, I filled out the environmental complaint, attached every document, mailed it certified. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire, it needs triplicate forms. While I waited for the state inspectors, the citations kept coming. Mailbox too far from road. Firewood stack, visible from public right-of-way. Visual blight. I stopped fixing them and started documenting everything. Then, out of nowhere, a knock on my door. Sunday afternoon. A man about 50, nervous, holding a folder. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Ken Ashford, HOA treasurer. I need to talk to you about Darlene Price." He laid out invoices, statements, and board minutes that didn't match. Darlene's been paying herself $4,000 a month in consulting fees. Never approved. And look at this. He pointed to an invoice dated the day after my bridge was demolished. $28,000 of HOA funds paid to the contractor who tore it down, labeled as emergency infrastructure repair. No vote. Minutes falsified afterward. I just stared. "Why are you showing me this?" He looked tired, because she fined my wife $500 for planting the wrong color roses, and because what she did to you was wrong. I made copies of everything. Shook his hand. "You're a good man, Ken." He said, "No, just an accountant who hates fraud." By then, I had everything: proof of expired environmental permits, conflict of interest with a county official, HOA funds used illegally. So I called Andrea Walsh, an investigative reporter out of Pittsburgh. "Ms. Walsh," I said, "I've got a story about an HOA president and a county commissioner, and about what happens when power thinks it's untouchable." We met at a diner. I brought a binder thicker than a phone book. She listened for 2 hours, asked sharp questions, took copies of key documents. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "Mr. Sullivan, if this checks out, you've got yourself a scandal." 5 days later, it broke online. Headline: County Commissioner linked to developer in HOA funding scandal, conflict of interest alleged. The next morning, 3 TV trucks parked outside Birchwood's gate. Reporters on the sidewalk, cameras rolling. By noon, the state environmental agency announced an investigation into Birchwood's sewage permit. That evening, Commissioner Gresham temporarily resigned from the planning board pending review. And Darlene Price? She stepped down as HOA president for personal reasons the next day. A week later, Mitch called. "You sitting down?" he said. "The HOA wants to settle. Full rebuild cost, legal fees, and a public apology printed in the local paper." I didn't gloat. I just looked out over the creek, where my bridge used to be. The water was calm again. "Tell them yes," I said, "and make sure the apology runs right next to the classifieds. That's where my grandfather used to buy his lumber." 2 months later, construction crews arrived, this time with permits, inspectors, and my supervision. We rebuilt the bridge exactly as Pops did: stone, timber, and iron. When it was done, I nailed a brass plaque to the railing, built 1943 by John Sullivan. rebuilt 2025 by his grandson, who learned the same lesson: build something right, it outlasts you. People sometimes ask if revenge was worth it. I tell them it wasn't revenge, it was balance. Because when you destroy someone's legacy, you don't just owe them money, you owe them truth. And truth, once built, stands longer than stone.